I will say the quiet part out loud. The Western world is under attack, and it has been for quite some time. It is my firmly held belief that the attack on the Western world that we see today in America and the one abroad in Europe and the other Western states is one and the same attack. We are living in a world that is facing a population crisis, one that is drastically different from the crisis we were taught to expect. For decades, especially in American schools, we were told that the planet was on the brink of catastrophic overpopulation. Influential works like The Population Bomb predicted mass starvation, resource depletion, and societal collapse due to uncontrolled population growth. Governments and international organizations echoed this alarm, with policies reflecting a deep fear of too many people. But time has not been kind to that narrative. Today, we know that we are actually facing the opposite problem. Global fertility rates are collapsing. According to the United Nations, two-thirds of the world's population now lives in countries where the birth rate has fallen below replacement levels, 2.1 children per woman. Nations like South Korea at 0.72, China at 1.1, Japan at 1.3, Italy at 1.2, and Germany at 1.4 are already in steep demographic decline. Even the United States, once considered demographically resilient, fell to 1.62 in 2023, the lowest in its history. And yet, the UN's projections, even as they acknowledge a future population peak and decline by the late 21st century, are wildly considered conservative. Many demographers argue the decline could be faster and more severe, especially if current social, economic, and psychological factors continue to suppress family formation. In short, the crisis is real, but it's not overpopulation. It's population collapse, and it will change the trajectory of civilization far more than most people have been led to believe. While we may not fully understand all the causes, what we do know is this: birth rates are collapsing across the developed world, falling well below replacement levels. This means that within our lifetimes, we will likely see a world where each new day brings fewer people than the last. The population is still climbing, but only barely, and only due to past momentum. Compare that to sub Saharan Africa and parts of Asia where populations are still growing rapidly, and Europe. In Europe, the opposite is true. Natural population decline is accelerating, and the median age in countries like Italy and Germany has already passed 45. The West is aging, shrinking, and retreating, while much of the rest of the world continues to expand. This truth, however different than what you once believed, is what I believe is the driver of the first reason. I believe that because the Western world has a significantly smaller population than other regions of the world, certain decisions were made behind closed doors and away from the public's prying eye. For the governments of the Western world, the realization that the total native population was something like 700 to 800 million in the year 2000, while the rest of the world contained over 6 billion other souls, turned out to be a wake up call to those both financially in power and those holding political power. With ideas like population decline becoming more real to those who were in the know, the rest of us went on believing that the population would explode. It became obvious to them that numerically, at some point in the future, political power would no longer be likely to remain in the hands they had had it over the previous millennia. If, as it turns out to be true, the West population was not only smaller, but disappearing faster, then it must also be true that one day the West would no longer be able to maintain its current structure. I believe that by the late 20th century, it had become clear to elite institutions, think tanks, global NGOs, and government planners that the population of the Western world was on track for irreversible decline. Quietly and without public debate, the solution they moved towards was not to revive native birth rates or restore cultural strength, but to manage the shift by gradually replacing the population itself. Rather than allow Western nations to evolve organically or even falter on their own terms, a new direction was chosen: mass migration as demographic policy. It was never publicly voted on, but it has been implemented consistently across borders, defended by media, and enforced by law. What might have been unthinkable, deliberate replacement, has now become a managed reality. Whether by coordination or ideological alignment, this policy direction has been upheld by most invested in preserving their power, even if it means transforming the very societies they claim to serve. In another era, this would have been called social engineering. In ours, it's simply progress. But the effect is the same. The original inhabitants of Western nations are quietly being phased out, not by accident, but by design. It's not conspiracy, it's demographic policy in the 21st century. In 100 years, the populations of countries on Earth, if left to their natural ends, would look very different than the world we see today. But why allow this to occur if we can try to control the events? You have two options. You could go along with the flow and just let things happen. If you happen to be in a position where you have a lot to lose, the likelihood that you will come out on top would be very slim. If, however, you choose to try to control the population change and do it over the course of the next 50 or 100 years, you might wipe out the original population of the Western world and solidify the death of the original inhabitants of those countries. But you have a far greater likelihood of being the ones that are in control at the end of the process. I call this the most suicidal gamble. And it is suicidal, and it is a gamble, but one that is actively being undertaken. Mass migration in the Western world is not merely tolerated, it is institutionalized, legally protected, and increasingly forced through censorship and criminalization. Across Europe and North America, citizens have been prosecuted, fined, or imprisoned for voicing concerns about the demographic and cultural consequences of immigration. At the same time, elite institutions frame this transformation as both a moral obligation and an economic necessity, thereby shielding it from scrutiny. Any dissent, no matter how reasoned, is dismissed as hate, phobia, or extremism. By criminalizing speech that questions this policy, governments have built a shield around the most radical transformation in modern history. And that shield doesn't just protect the policy, it blocks any chance of reversing it. The plight of Ireland, France, the Netherlands, or any country like them in Europe, other than Poland, is not isolated to that side of the pond. We have watched Canada creep into the same ideologies that have infected all of Europe. We have seen every last thing that paves the way to allow the people of those countries to be tricked into the positions that they are currently in, thrust down the American throat as well. It is my belief that the reason why we see the same pattern of insanity, from woke to immigration, playing out the exact same way across the globe, is that the same playbook is being followed. Any but the blind now know that the Great Replacement is not a conspiracy. In many major European cities, the native born population is no longer the majority. Urban centers like London, Paris, Amsterdam, and Stockholm have already seen their demographics shift significantly. Children born to migrants or whose parents are migrants now make up a growing share of the population. In some of these cities, Native Europeans constitute less than 50% of the younger generations. This trend highlights a profound demographic transformation underway at an urban level, which is often the first sign of a broader societal change. Again, I can't help but think the very same thing is playing out in the United States. Donald Trump, now in his second term as president in 2025, has thrown a significant wrench into the plans to fundamentally alter America's demographics. His administration has made clear it's determined to stop the demographic replacement that has already reshaped much of Europe. The backlash from global elites, multi international corporations, and international institutions has been intense. They fear that his policies on immigration, border security, and cultural preservation threaten their long term agendas. Without Trump standing in the way, it seems only a matter of time before mass immigration policies continue unchecked, accelerating the transformation of the Western world. Yet, even now, with Trump's firm resistance, the force behind this demographic shift remains powerful, and the battle for the future of the West is far from over in the USA. As President of the United States in his second term, he has sworn that what happened in Europe will not happen here. And for taking that stand, world leaders and financial elites hate him more than any president in modern American history. Believe that with Trump back in office and a Republican government in place, the United States is somehow protected from the demographic replacement already far advanced across Europe. But that would be a dangerous assumption. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that progress doesn't require the consent of the people. It only requires their distraction. In every Western country where this shift has taken place, it happened not with public support, but behind closed doors, driven by elites, forced by media narratives, and protected by laws that punish dissent. The citizenry of France, Germany, Sweden, and the Netherlands were not asked if they wanted their countries transformed. They were simply told it was progress. By the time public awareness caught up, the damage had already been done. The same pattern is taking root in America, and even with Trump actively resisting it, the underlying system keeps grinding forward because this replacement does not need a single global architect to move. It has the passive backing of every major institution that benefits from it. If the American people don't fully grasp what's unfolding and why, then no matter how much success we find at home, we will wake up to find ourselves a lone island in a world unrecognizable long before 50 years has passed, and certainly within 100. Even if we become fiercely nationalistic and seal our borders, we cannot survive in isolation. America alone cannot carry the mantle of Western civilization. What we need now is nothing short of a great awakening, a realization that the fight to preserve the West doesn't end at our border. It means standing with every nation still willing to fight for the values we once shared and doing everything in our power to restore what has been lost. The powers that be have chosen not to inform the public of the Western world about what is truly happening because they understand that if we fully grasp it, we might choose to remain as we are. And that decision to hold the line and preserve ourselves is unacceptable to those investing in reshaping the global order. They would rather lie, obscure, and reframe this transformation as moral duty because to them, a culturally confident West is a threat to their future. In his prophetic 1996 work, The Clash of Civilizations, Samuel P. Huntington warned, not as an advocate, but as an analyst, that the West must recognize that its culture is unique, not universal. He described a world increasingly defined not by ideology, but by enduring cultural blocks, where the Islamic world in particular would reassert itself not through assimilation, but through confrontation. His words were not a call to arms, but a warning to prepare for what the 21st century would demand of us. Meanwhile, leading Islamic movements have made no secret of their ambitions. The Muslim Brotherhood's own international memorandum refers to its goal in America as eliminating and destroying Western civilization from within. Iran's leadership regularly calls for the Islamination of the West, framing liberalism as a decadent threat to the divine order. Salafist clerics, influential across the Middle East and in migrant communities in Europe, openly declare that democracy must give way to Sharia law. These are not abstract theological debates, they are civilizational claims. And yet, rather than defend what the West is, our elites promote a doctrine of managed decline. They would rather usher in something new, even at the cost of everything we once were, than to allow the West to stand and resist. Personally, I believe we can counter the causes of population decline, especially here at home. Rather than succumbing to despair, we should focus on building our nation and welcoming immigrants who genuinely embrace Western values. In particular, we have natural allies in countries like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and parts of Eastern Europe, nations whose peoples tend to assimilate more readily into Western culture because of shared family orientated values and meritocratic cultures. Immigrants from East Asia, for example, often bring strong work ethics, respect for education, and commitment to family, values that align closely with the foundations of Western civilization. By encouraging the inclusion of those who hold these compatible values, we can strengthen the social fabric without sacrificing our identity. However, the most important task is to inspire Western people themselves to believe in the West again, to recognize and cherish the civilization that has given the world so much. Only when we restore confidence and pride in our own culture can we build a future that honors our heritage while forging new alliances. There is still time to unite with the nations and peoples willing to defend the Western world, not by conquest, but by friendship and shared purpose. Some countries may need liberation from cruel regimes that oppress their citizens, and we should stand ready to support those brave enough to seek freedom. Anyone who is not completely dishonest with themselves and knows the history of the Islamic world would tell you that there is zero likelihood that any arrangement of the West is going to find itself in a position where Islam respects it and lets it be on its own. One day there will likely become a clash between these two civilizations, those who have taken the Western fold and those that would like to see the Old Testament world reborn. But this would be a far better feat than losing the civilization that has always acted as Carl Sagan's candle in the dark.